Chapter 20. This is the chapter where the United States stops being a country that reacts to the world and starts being a country the world has to react to. In 1898, America fights a war that lasts about 16 weeks and ends with it owning territory an ocean away. That's not an accident, it's a decision. And by 1919, that same decision produces a president personally negotiating world peace in Paris, France. And this isn't ancient history sitting behind glass. Puerto Rico and Guam, acquired in this chapter, are still U.S. territories today. Their residents still American citizens who still can't vote for president. The debates about American power abroad that start here, how much force, how much moral justification, how much economic interest, are the same debates running underneath foreign policy headlines right now. 3 things today. 1. The Spanish-American War and the birth of American overseas empire. 2. How 3 presidents used 3 different strategies to run that empire, and how those strategies dragged the country into World War I. 3. What fighting a total war did to civil liberties at home, and the pandemic that hit the country at the exact same moment. Let's get into it. Why does a country that spent its whole history avoiding European-style empire suddenly want one? 3 overlapping motives. Economic. Industrial output has outgrown the domestic market, and businesses want guaranteed overseas customers. Strategic. Naval officer Alfred Thayer Mahan publishes The Influence of Sea Power Upon History in 1890, arguing that great powers throughout history won through strong navies and overseas coaling stations, a book Theodore Roosevelt basically treats as scripture. The U.S. Navy jumps from 12th in the world to 3rd in just 20 years on the strength of that argument. And ideological. Social Darwinism, the same survival of the fittest logic used to justify domestic monopolies, gets applied internationally, arguing Anglo-Saxon civilization has a duty to expand. 1898 gives all 3 motives a target. Cuba is fighting for independence from Spain, and after the battleship Maine mysteriously explodes in Havana Harbor, jingoist newspapers push the U.S. into war. Congress passes the Teller Amendment, pledging the U.S. won't annex Cuba, a promise it mostly keeps, though the follow-up Platt Amendment keeps Cuba on a very short leash anyway. The war itself lasts about 4 months, killing far more soldiers to disease than combat. The peace treaty hands the U.S. Puerto Rico and Guam outright, and Spain also cedes the Philippines. Hawaii gets annexed that same year, following a coup American planters staged against Queen Liliuokalani 5 years earlier. But acquiring the Philippines meant fighting the Filipinos, who had been fighting Spain for their own independence and assumed America was there to help, not replace their colonizer. The Philippine-American War that follows is brutal and largely forgotten. Roughly 200,000 Filipino civilians die, compared to fewer than 400 American combat deaths in Cuba. An American general orders his troops to kill and burn, and the more you kill and burn, the better you will please me, an order that generated public outrage even at the time. That outrage fuels a genuine domestic anti-imperialist movement, an odd coalition including Andrew Carnegie, Jane Addams, Mark Twain, and labor leader Samuel Gompers, who argued occupying the Philippines betrayed America's own founding principles. Tellingly, many anti-imperialists opposed annexation for the same racist reasons imperialists supported it. They simply didn't think Filipinos could ever be civilized enough to be worth incorporating. They lost the argument anyway. The treaty was ratified, and the United States held the Philippines for the next 45 years. Puerto Rico and Guam are still exactly what they became in 1898, U.S. territories whose residents pay some federal taxes and can be drafted into the military, but can't vote for the president who might send them to war. Puerto Rico has held multiple statehood referendums since, and Congress still hasn't acted. That unfinished business, citizens without full representation, is a direct, unbroken line from this chapter to a live political argument today. Once the empire exists, each president manages it differently. Roosevelt's approach is big stick diplomacy, back diplomacy with visible military force. When Colombia won't approve a canal deal, Roosevelt backs a Panamanian revolution instead, gets his canal treaty from the brand new government within days, and the Panama Canal opens in 1914. He adds the Roosevelt corollary to the Monroe Doctrine too, declaring the U.S. can intervene anywhere in Latin America to fix chronic wrongdoing, essentially making the whole hemisphere America's responsibility to police. Taft swaps the stick for a checkbook. Dollar diplomacy, encouraging American banks to invest in Latin America and Asia instead of sending troops, though he still sends Marines to Nicaragua for over 2 decades when American fruit and mining investments got threatened anyway. Wilson claims the moral high ground, moral diplomacy, refusing to recognize governments he considers illegitimate. In practice, it looks almost identical. He sends the Navy into Veracruz, then troops into Mexico chasing Pancho Villa, an operation that accomplishes nothing except angering Mexico further. That pattern, force, then money, then moral language, still describes how great powers justify intervention today. Sanctions and investment deals are the modern dollar diplomacy. Speeches about defending democracy abroad echo Wilson's moral diplomacy almost word for word. And the underlying question Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson never really answered, does a powerful country get to decide what's good for a weaker one, is still the exact question at the center of debates over American involvement in conflicts overseas right now. Meanwhile, in Europe, a war breaks out in 1914 that Wilson initially keeps America out of, urging Americans to stay impartial in thought as well as action. 2 forces pull the country in anyway. First, economic ties. American trade with the Allies quadruples within 3 years, while trade with Germany collapses under a British blockade, meaning American prosperity is now tied directly to an Allied victory. Second, German submarine warfare. In 1915, a U-boat sinks the passenger liner Lusitania without warning, killing over 1,000 people. Germany resumes unrestricted submarine warfare in February 1917, gambling it can defeat the Allies before America can mobilize. The final push is the Zimmermann telegram. British intelligence intercepts a German offer to Mexico, promising Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona back if Mexico joins Germany. When it goes public, it turns a skeptical American public into a war-ready one almost overnight. Congress declares war in April 1917 over the objections of a small group of holdouts, including Senator Robert La Follette and the first woman ever elected to Congress, Jeannette Rankin. Fighting a modern war means mobilizing the entire economy. The War Industries Board coordinates industrial production nationwide. The Committee on Public Information, run by journalist George Creel, produces propaganda and pressures newspapers into self-censorship, essentially manufacturing public enthusiasm for a war Americans were divided about. And when propaganda wasn't enough, the government criminalized dissent outright. The Espionage Act of 1917 and Sedition Act of 1918 make it a federal crime to criticize the war, the draft, or even the military uniform. Socialist leader Eugene Debs gets 10 years in prison for a single anti-war speech. In Schenck versus United States, the Supreme Court unanimously upholds these laws, ruling wartime speech can be restricted if it poses a clear and present danger, a legal standard courts still cite today. A quasi-official group called the American Protective League spies on German-American neighbors, while sauerkraut gets renamed Liberty Cabbage in a wave of enforced patriotism. The Espionage Act of 1917 isn't a museum piece. It's the same statute used to prosecute leakers and whistleblowers like Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden. A law written to jail Eugene Debs is still active law today. Same statute, same tension. National security versus free speech. The same years see the Great Migration accelerate as black Southerners move north for factory jobs, only to still face segregation. And then, in the middle of the war, a pandemic hits. The 1918 influenza kills an estimated 50 million people worldwide. Wilson, consumed by the war, never publicly addresses it and leaves the response to city and state governments. Philadelphia holds a massive parade anyway and pays for it with over 12,000 deaths, while cities that closed schools fared better. If that sounds familiar, a patchwork of city and state responses instead of one clear federal plan, competing over masks and closures, that's essentially the exact same fight the country had over COVID-19 almost exactly a century later. Once fighting ends in November 1918, Wilson sails to Paris promoting his 14 points, a vision built around self-determination and a League of Nations. He gets his league into the Versailles Treaty, but has to compromise on a war guilt clause for Germany. Back home, the Senate refuses to ratify it. Henry Cabot Lodge demands reservations protecting American sovereignty. Wilson refuses to compromise, suffers a stroke, and the treaty fails. The U.S. never joins the League of Nations it invented. The exact same sovereignty versus cooperation argument still surrounds U.S. participation in the United Nations and international courts today. So here's Chapter 20. In 20 years, the U.S. goes from continental republic to global power. Know your contrast set for the three presidents. Roosevelt's big stick, backed by force. Taft's dollar diplomacy, backed by investment. Wilson's moral diplomacy, backed by principle. That ends up looking a lot like the other two in practice. Know your causes of WWI entry. Economic ties to the Allies, unrestricted submarine warfare, and the Zimmerman telegram. Know the domestic cost. The Espionage and Sedition Acts, and the fact that we were prosecuting citizens for criticizing a fight to make the world safe for democracy. Lock in your dates. 1898, the War of 1898 and Teller Amendment. 1917, U.S. entry into World War I. 1918, the Influenza Pandemic and the 14 Points. 1919 into 1920, the Senate rejects the Treaty of Versailles. Get your Chapter 20 source response done in Canvas, and be ready to explain why moral language and military force kept showing up in the same policy, then and now. See you in Chapter 21.